Hi everyone, this is the beginner's guide to graphing the cosine wave, and what we're going to do is I'm going to first of all change this to theta. We're looking at our quadrantals, which is our 90-degree angles here. We're just going to draw a characteristic curve and plot the points. So cosine of 0, remember cosine is your x over r, and r is 1. So we're just going to let it be x here. So cosine of 0 is 1. Cosine of pi over 2 is 0. Cosine of pi is negative 1. Cosine of 3 pi over 2 is 0. Remember it's your x value. And back to 2 pi, we're back to 1. So if you notice your output here, your f of theta, is 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1. Now we also want to do the negative ones because we're going to draw two waves. So negative pi over 2 just means you go clockwise here, which is actually 3 pi over 2, but your x is 0. And then you go all the way to negative pi. That's going to be negative 1. Back to negative 3 pi over 2, which is 0. And back to negative 2 pi. And you're going clockwise here again, is 1. And so what you're going to do, remember your angle is your input. So that's what you're going to label on your x-axis. And your output is these numbers. And we're going from, on the output, we're going from 1 to negative 1. So let's look at it. So if you have those plotted, we know that cosine of 0 is 1. Cosine of pi over 2 is 0. Cosine of pi is negative 1. Cosine of 3 pi over 2 is 0. And cosine of 2 pi is back to 1. So it kind of makes a V shape. But what you want to do is make it curvy, because this continues on and on and on. You can even draw an arrow here if you want to continue on and on. Now let's go on the left side of the graph and go clockwise. So cosine of negative pi over 2 is 0. Cosine of negative pi is negative 1. Cosine of negative 3 pi over 2 is 0. And back to 1 on negative 2 pi. And then you just make it like this. Make it wavy, don't make it pointy. Alright. And it looks like a W. So the cosine wave looks like a W when you're graphing two waves, whereas the sine wave looks more like a zigzag if you're graphing two waves, or even one wave for that matter. This is an even function. That means it reflects over the y-axis. This is your f of theta axis here. You could fold it up on that and it matches up, so that means it's an even function. Now what you need to do is, on cosine, you need to do this 5 times. You need to be able to graph this cosine wave very quickly. So if you practice this 5 times, you have it, because when you do transformations, it's going to come in very handy that you just automatically know how to graph the cosine wave. So just remember, let's look at our, I call them dots, they're really points, but I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 key points here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have a total of 9 key points, or I call them dots sometimes, that you can quickly do it. So this is how fast you should be able to graph the cosine wave. You know it looks like a W. You should know where you start at here, and you go dot, 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 and we can continue on with the dot, 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 and you should be able to graph this very quickly. And the way you graph it's up to you, but I always do one side first, then I do the other side, and I kind of come around like this. Now, If you notice that this should actually go back down a little further. Sorry here. This goes back down. And this should go back down here. I messed up there. That our domain is all real numbers because it's going to continue on and on and on. You can go on and on because the circle goes on and on. Your range, however, let's see, I got to go up to here. This is 1. Goes from 1 to -1 because that's the length of that. So that's your range. So let's fill that out. Again, your domain is all real numbers. And if you write an interval notation, that would be -infinity to infinity. That just means remember your domain is your angles, and that can go around and around and around. So it's going to be all real numbers. Now, if you use interval notation, you're going to say your angle belongs to all real numbers such that theta is in between -infinity to infinity. All right, and then for your range, remember we talked about that. Your range goes from -1 to 1. It can equal -1. So use the close. Oh, what did I do here? This should be open. You can never equal infinity because infinity is not a number. And then for your set notation, you go y, or you could say f of theta, which is your y. That's your y. Your output belongs to all real numbers such that y is in between or equal to -1 to 1. You want to practice both of these ways to write your domain and range. And that's it. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.